Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to ITW Presents Vista 2020. This session is exclusively brought to you by our gold sponsor and health and wellness partner, Sakra World Hospital. We have with us today Mr. N.R. Narayanamurthy. Mr. Murthy founded Infosys in 1981. Infosys is today a highly innovative software services global company listed on NYSE in the US and on the Bombay Stock Exchange in Mumbai with over US $12 billion in revenue and about 57 billion USD in market capitalization. Mr. Murthy conceptualized and articulated and implemented the global delivery model GDM, which has become the backbone of the Indian software industry. Under Mr. Murthy's leadership, Infosys became the leader in innovation in technical, managerial, and leadership training, software technology, quality, productivity, customer focus, employee satisfaction, and physical and technological infrastructure. In 2014, Mr. Murthy was ranked 13th among the CNBC's 25 global business leaders and listed among the 12 greatest entrepreneurs of our time by Fortune in 2012. He has received Legion d'honneur from France, CBE from Britain, and Padma Vibhushan from India. The Economist ranked him among the 10 most admired global business leaders in 2005. Mr. Murthy is ranked among the top 10 of the Financial Times list of business pioneers in technology, published in March 2015. He is the first Indian winner of the Ernst & Young's World Entrepreneur of the Year award. Mr. Murthy was elected as a member of the prestigious American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2019. He is a foreign member of the US National Academy of Engineering and a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering. He is also a member of the Board of Governors and Trustees of the Asian Institute of Management, Manila. Currently, Mr. Murthy serves on the boards of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, New Jersey, and the United Nations Foundation. He has served on the boards of Ford Foundation in New York, HSBC, and Unilever in London. A very, very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would also like to welcome PGP Chairperson, Professor Padmini Srinivasan, and invite her to welcome Mr. Murthy.
Muted? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Murthy, for taking time out and addressing our students. In fact, we missed you last year in the Vista program where you were supposed to address the students and you were not able to join us. You have been a role model for all the students, your employees and others. One person, if I am able to think about walk the talk, that's Mr. Narayan Murthy. Personally, I have seen you many times, even in the airport, carrying your green bag on your own, unlike others and so on. So welcome once again, and thank you very much for taking time out and addressing in this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. The moderators of this session would be Ms. Lakshmi Devi and Ms. Aishwarya Nair, second-year MBA students at IIM Bangalore. We try to explore the portraits of progress, which is the theme of Vista 2020, through these diverse roles that Mr. Murthy has played in his life. Without any delay, I would like to hand it over to the moderators.
Thank you, Sonali. Good evening, sir. It's an absolute pleasure to have you in our presence. We will start off today with understanding your journey as an entrepreneur. So before founding Infosys, you had started Softronics. And after a year and a half, you moved on and joined Patni Computer Systems. So how did the experience of being an entrepreneur of Softronics influence you to start Infosys later?
Well, are you going? Okay. Softronics taught me a very basic lesson that no entrepreneur can succeed when there is no market for his or her idea, and that assessing the market before starting the entrepreneurial journey is very important. Those days, there were very few computers in the country. ECIL manufactured a very rudimentary computer in small numbers. The government tried to protect ECIL by not allowing import of computers. In any case, this computer was not suitable for developing applications for commercial purposes. That's why I failed. It is very important for every entrepreneur to get an estimate of the market for his idea because the value of one's idea is determined by the markets.
So you founded Infosys in 1981 with 6 engineers in Pune, and the initial capital that you put in was $250. Today, if you look at the market cap of Infosys, it has crossed over $40 billion. And this is a classic example of speed to scale. Undoubtedly, your entrepreneurial mindset and your passion for work transformed Infosys to the IT giant it is today. But if you look back to the 80s, how difficult was it to do business back then?
Well, friction to business from the government was very high those days. It took about 3 years and 50 visits to Delhi to get a license to import a computer. There was no current account convertibility. Therefore, you had to apply to the Reserve Bank of India and wait for 15 to 20 days to get foreign exchange to travel abroad even for a day. Getting a telephone connection took 5 to 7 years. There were no venture capitalists those days. Banks had not even heard of software. So therefore, I would sum it up and say it was pretty difficult.
Thank you for that, sir. So before you founded Infosys, you had started Softronics, and after like about a year and a half, you moved on and joined Patni Computer Systems. So how did Softronics influence the entrepreneur in you to start Infosys later?
Well, as I told before, you had asked this question, I said Softronics taught me a very basic lesson. That is, no entrepreneur can succeed when there is no market for his or her idea. And therefore, assessing the market before starting the entrepreneurial journey is very important. That's what I would advise the entrepreneurs assembled here to do. And that is the biggest lesson I learned from my failure in Softronics.
Right, so that's a very important lesson for all entrepreneurs in this meeting, right? Now, if you look at the license Raj days, I'm sure the businessmen back then faced a lot of difficulties, and our ways of doing business back then, as well as our government institutions, were crippled with red tape. You also said once that it took 3 years, 50 trips to Delhi to import one computer. And when you got the license to import, the West would have come up with a new generation of computers.
Yeah.
Today, we're in a free market, right? But businesses have their own set of challenges. Now, if you look at today's world, what are the 3 main challenges that you would have to face if a company like Infosys had to be established today?
Well, if I tried to become an entrepreneur today, I would face several challenges much bigger than what I faced in 1981. The first challenge is generating an idea to create a differentiated business value proposition that is better than the existing players in today's extremely crowded and competitive global market. The entrepreneur also has a big challenge of scaling up his or her business. This is perhaps the biggest challenge for today's high-tech entrepreneurs from India. Second is the ability to raise huge amounts of capital from venture capitalists in competition with global entrepreneurs. There is a mindset of spray and pray among some of the VCs. Entrepreneurs have gotten to the mindset of big money from VCs. Not everybody can be successful in obtaining such huge amounts of money. Third, the idea of software services is not very attractive to venture capitalists of today, and services businesses do not obtain good valuation today. So entrepreneurs have to move on to product ideas for the global market. This is a big problem. There is not even one Indian product that has yet reached $1 billion in revenue. There is hardly any experience of producing world-class products in India. Talent for high-tech software product management simply does not exist in our country. Fourth, there is a tremendous shortage of software development professionals who have a proactive mindset for problem solving through software products in India. Talent, in my opinion, is a very serious problem.
Thank you for your remarks, sir. So you have been vocal about the importance of trade associations for Indian industry. And for example, when you take NASSCOM, it has been the underlying the value of Indian IT BPM industry and has also been involved in policy advocacy and industry development. So with such a setup, we see a collaborate and compete model in the industry. So how important are trade associations in other sectors in driving the larger growth of industry and economy as a whole? And are they doing enough?
Well, NASSCOM was the brainchild of a few visionary individuals. NASSCOM was set up in 1988. Its purpose was to create a strong voice for the software services companies, which were very, very small those days. Thanks to the committed work of a few industry leaders and Sri Devang Mehta, late Sri Devang Mehta, NASSCOM brought tremendous visibility to our industry during the 90s. NASSCOM leaders collaborated well while competing in the marketplace. Initially, NASSCOM had a twin agenda. First, obtaining tax exemption for fledgling software companies, and second, establishing market credibility in our developed markets. NASSCOM succeeded well in both these objectives. It was in 2000 that the industry welcomed the BPO industry. So trade associations are necessary for every sector of the economy as long as they identify supra company issues and enthuse the industry leaders to come together and work with the government to resolve those issues. Every industry association has to recognize that one of the big issues today is the shortage of talent for the industry to keep pace with the rate of growth. Our talent is at best reactive problem solving. This is not sufficient. Our talent will have to develop proactive problem recognition and solution orientation in every industry. Second, as I pointed out earlier, there is very little knowledge in the industry in India about product management in every industry, not just software, in every industry. Third, the Indian manufacturing industry has not yet developed world-class products at affordable prices for the domestic market. The other day, I saw on Facebook an advertisement for two terabyte USB drives for just $35. In other words, they were selling a 2 terabyte USB drive for just $17.50. Now, India has not been able to produce any USB drive, even one of 2 gigabytes, forget about 2 terabyte, that is 1,000th of it. Our phased manufacturing policy embraced by the government of the 70s killed any chance of India becoming a worthwhile manufacturing player in the hardware industry. Our industry associations therefore can play a role by helping the bureaucracy formulate sensible policies, by reducing friction to businesses, by working with venture capital companies, by working with universities to update the quality of talent, and by creating a mechanism for Indian companies to develop products for the local markets.
Absolutely, sir. I think we all agree with you on this point. And I hope this changes in the future. So that was about your role as an entrepreneur. And now we'll move on to your next role, which you played as a leader in the IT industry, as a pioneer in the field of IT, and as a global icon, right? So if you look at the first Indian company to have issued ESOP, it was Infosys. And this underlines how important human capital really is for an organization. Over the years, we've also seen Infosys investing heavily in learning and development of its employees. And if you look at 2020, considering how important talent is, what radical steps must a company take to retain such good talent?
Well, the biggest challenge that every company, in every industry, in every nation has is the ability to attract, enable, empower, and retain the best and the brightest talent. Now, how do we do it? The youngsters look for a few things in a corporation to enthuse them. First, they want a challenging job which will help them to learn new things every day. Second, they want full transparency on their career growth path and what they have to do to go up the corporate ladder. Third, they want to have pride in the corporation for which they work. So they want to work for a corporation which is highly respected. Fourth, they want a competitive salary. If we satisfy these criteria, I believe that we can attract good talent. Now, let me come to the question of how to produce the kind of talent that industry wants. I have already alluded to this huge problem in my earlier answers. There are several dimensions to solving this problem. First is to change the mindset of our college students from being reactive problem solvers to proactive problem recognizers and solvers. This is the only way we can hope to produce a Google or a Microsoft or a Facebook. Our youngsters expect their customers to define the next step in solving the business problem for them. Then these youngsters start implementing the technical solution. With this kind of mindset, India will find it very difficult to produce an Apple or a Snowflake or a Salesforce.com. This problem cannot be solved unless we reorient our education system right from the primary school stage towards studying our environment, understanding why it is so, understand what can be done to make it better, and use our intelligence to overcome the limitations of nature. For example, somebody in the West, 80 years ago asked, why can't we talk to a person, 100 and odd years ago, why can't we talk to a person who is far away? And he or she started solving that problem. That resulted in the telephone system which came sometime around 1890. Somebody else asked 80 years ago, why we cannot see a person who is 100 miles away, and that's how television was invented. That is where our youngsters have to learn to study nature, understand its limitation, and then think of a way of solving that problem. The second dimension is our fast deteriorating quality of English. English has become the universal language of communication and knowledge. The maximum knowledge available is in English. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. Our youngsters, therefore, will have to become the best communicators in English if we want to absorb all the knowledge that the world is generating each day. That is the only way we can produce the best engineers, the best doctors, the best scientists, and the best managers. But if we continue the policy of suppressing English, India will become a dark, undeveloped, poor, unhealthy, and suffering place. Our examination system has to change from rote learning to open book system. Today, I have seen top ranking students in some of our local engineering colleges learn by heart a couple of computer programs without understanding it and obtain 100 out of 100 marks in the examination. I have interviewed hundreds of toppers in computer science from our local engineering colleges who cannot even write the pseudocode for what we call P and V semaphores. That is almost like a student of accounting in a management school not knowing debits and credits. This has to change. This will not change unless the best students from the open book examinations paradigm are incentivized to become teachers. I started that experiment in 2002 in our own education research group at Infosys.
Thank you for that, sir. And you made like key valuable inputs, and we hope that the world, India changes for the better in the upcoming years.
Yeah.
Sir, you had iterated multiple times that a clear conscience is the softest pillow in the world. You admitted in the past that you faced stress when Infosys was going through a period of corporate governance issues, but eventually the company came out stronger. So what are the two pieces of advice that you would give future generation of businessmen and entrepreneurs on integrity and transparency?
You know, I had the fortune of working with John Huntsman when he was the chairman of the board of overseers at the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania. I was on the board of overseers. I learned so much from him. I have his book. The title of the book is Winners Never Cheat. I have the Kindle version on my iPad. I have the hard copy, all of that. I will repeat verbatim the subtitles of the 9 chapters of this wonderful must-read business book. I would request every one of you to kindly buy this book and use it as your business Gita or business Quran or business Agamas or business Granth Sahib or your business Torah or your business Avesta. The titles are the following. 1, circumstances may change, but your values should not. Second, everything you need for today's marketplace we learned as kids. Third, you know damn well what is right and what is wrong. Fourth, compete fiercely and fairly, but no cutting in line. Fifth, risk, responsibility or accountability and reliability are the 3 R's of leadership. Sixth, surround yourself with associates who have the courage to say no to you. Seventh, revenge is unhealthy and unproductive. Learn to move on. Eighth, treat competitors, colleagues, employees, investors, vendors, and customers with respect. Ninth and the last, accept that values are child's play, not rocket science. This is what I would say.
Thank you so much for your advice, sir. This is very helpful. Now that we've understood your role as a leader, we'll move on to your role as a visionary. If you look at global delivery model, it was the brainchild of Infosys, and you pioneered the IT wave in India, put India in the global spotlight. You made the West look at us in a different light. However, of late, we do not see much radical innovation stemming from India. We largely witnessed a westernized way of doing things, which is customized to suit Indian needs. According to you, sir, why has India taken a backseat when it comes to innovation?
You know, in some way I already addressed that, but let me continue on the same theme. Our current education system has not helped us to think independently and create solutions to our problems. History tells us that the period 400 AD to 1400 AD was the golden millennium of India. This is when we encourage the best mathematicians, astronomers, surgeons, economists, strategists, and philosophers in the Indian society. We progressed during this period because our education system at that point of time encouraged us to look at our environment, observe it carefully, understand anomalies between the reality and our theories, modify our theory, and find solutions to our problems. Understanding the mysteries of nature around us with our current knowledge, advancing the knowledge in the process, finding solutions to the limitations of nature, and making life better for us is the purpose of education. Unless we get back to this kind of education, it will be difficult for India to invent and innovate solutions to our problems and advance our civilization. Our teachers have to realize, as Professor Richard Hamming once said, let me quote his statement. He said, teachers should prepare the student for the student's future and not for the teacher's past. Kindly remember that. Therefore, teachers have to focus on how to prepare the student for the student's future and not tell them whatever they learned in the past. Our educational institutions, unfortunately, focus only on the past. This has to change. Socratic learning has to become the norm of the day.
Thank you, sir. That was very thought-provoking, and I'm sure everyone would remember the quote that you had mentioned.
Thank you.
Sir, you've stated in the past that no economic transformation can take place unless there is a cultural transformation. The way I see India is that it's a free market which is riddled with volatile government interventions. Our policies are shaped more by public sentiment rather than by merit. So what measurements can be taken by politicians and bureaucrats to ensure transparency in policy making and to also ensure that they are consistent in the long run?
You know, I am a firm believer in Max Weber, and I believe that economic progress in any society requires a huge cultural transformation. And it's the same in India too. This cultural transformation has to result in a higher level of honesty, meritocracy, objectivity, open-mindedness to learn from people better than us, confidence, pluralism, respect for others' beliefs and faith, transparency, humility, and consistency in designing and implementing our policies. We should be ready to learn from nations that have performed better than us. I am told by several intellectuals in India and abroad that there is a severe shortage of intellectuals in India for finding solutions to the problems of our huge population. At least as a percentage, okay? There is an urgent need to leverage the intellect and value system of this small number of intellectuals for creating sound national policies. My own belief is that we should transcend the issue of what parties these intellectuals belong to and what their ideology is. After all, let us remember that Mahatma Gandhi wanted the Congress party to be dissolved after independence and a national government to be formed. These intellectuals that I'm talking about should leave behind their ideologies and party affiliations and focus purely on designing policies that will make our country better socially and economically. In other words, there is a need for our governments and our intellectuals to transcend party affiliations and ideologies in appointments, at least at the level of policy advisors. I personally believe that this is an experiment worth trying.
Absolutely, sir. So there's one more follow-up question on education and policy, mixing it together. So, Sudha Murthy ma'am's book on how I taught my grandmother to read says a lot about the state of education. And if you look at the National Education Policy of 2020, do you think it is a welcome change for the Indian education system? Do you think, as you said before, does it prepare students for the future rather than the teachers past?
You know, I have tremendous respect for my friend, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and for Dr. Manjul Bhargav, who were involved in framing this policy. There were others too, but I know these two people well. I am not familiar with the details of this document. All that I can say is, as long as the policy attempts to make Indian youngsters independent thinkers, inventors, innovators, and proactive problem solvers, I am quite happy. That's all what I would like to say.
Thank you for that, sir. So now let's look into the role of you as an investor and as a philanthropist. So India ranks 63rd out of the 190 nations in Doing Business 2020 report by the World Bank Group. However, India displays a dismal performance in starting a business, registering property, and enforcing contracts. Do you feel that these rankings play a big role in bringing capital to the country? Or is there some kind of soft power which is also involved?
You know, rankings always matter. We must simply accept it. Now, let me move from ranking to what is it that we can do. I would dream of an India where the national and state level leaders articulate a policy of creating jobs, enhancing the median salary of our employees, moving more and more people from agriculture to manufacturing and services, improving the per capita revenue productivity in agriculture as well as in other areas, and enhancing our net exports, that is exports minus imports. There should be these three important KPIs for every chief minister and for the central government. In these days of fast economic progress, the old British model of generalist administrators should give way to specialist managers with a focus on management graduates. These specialist managers should spend their time in just one department or function during their entire service in the government. You should not transfer them every 3 years or every 2 years as it happens today. State and the central governments may be encouraged to provide full transparency to the entire workflow involved, right from welcoming a business, whether it's Indian or foreign, to starting of production. There should be published deadlines for decision by the bureaucracy for each step in the workflow. Data on target, deadline, and the actual status of the decision should be displayed on the website. Our bureaucracies should be measured by their value addition in the value chain of the three or four KPIs that I spoke about. Each department in the state and the central government should have a citizen committee consisting of highly respected and competent citizens knowledgeable in that area. Promotion and increments for bureaucrats should be jointly decided by the chairman of this committee and the concerned minister. I have already told you that good leadership is about risk-taking ability, accountability, and reliability. Therefore, we have to improve accountability and reliability of our bureaucracy.
Absolutely, sir. We just hope that in the future, things are more transparent for us, right? That will help us make a more informed decision. Right. So moving on to the next question. In the last couple of years, we've witnessed an implicit message from the government. Foreign capital is welcome, but foreign competition is not. There's a lack of level playing field for e-commerce players, and there was a requirement from RBI for global payment firms to store data within India, and the recent ban on Chinese apps and contracts. So if we see large global firms forging partnerships with strong local players and making them investee companies,
So, looking forward, how will this really shape the investment climate?
Every expert in economics, both macro and micro, that I speak to tells me that there is a big requirement of capital for economic development in India. Therefore, we have to create a positive climate for foreign investment and Indian investment. Integrity of thought and action, both in the government and among the opposition parties, is extremely important in bringing about these kinds of transformation. Our government should accept this fact and make India the most hospitable country for foreign investment. Experts in foreign investment from India and abroad may be hired and given responsibility to identify 20 to 25 conditions which will make India one of the top 3 nations in the world for foreign investment from the current 63rd position. Progressive and competent bureaucrats should be charged with the responsibility of implementing these recommendations with an aggressive target date. Full transparency must be given on website to these recommendations and to the workflow to implement these recommendations. The party in government and the parties in opposition must work closely and in full cooperation to get these recommendations implemented and improved.
Thank you, sir. And I hope that adequate steps are taken to improve the situation. So, for the next question, what would you as an investor look for in a firm before you invest in it?
That's a very good question. I look for values and competence in entrepreneurs before I invest in their ideas. Values are extremely important if we have to create confidence in our investors, employees, and customers. That I want every entrepreneur to remember. Second, without competence, you cannot make much progress. That is why even at Infosys, I chose the byline, powered by intellect, driven by values.
Yes, I think that's a very important advice, sir. Moving on to the next question, the market rejoices when foreign capital flows into India. As we know, in developing nations, labor is cheap and capital is dear. How important is domestic capital for a country, and how can we build and encourage a sustained level of domestic capital flowing into domestic firms?
Making the domestic capital an important source for our industry, it has to become the top priority in India. For example, most venture capital funding in India is from outside. I happen to be the chairman of the Alternate Investment Policy Advisory Committee of SEBI. Now, we are debating there how to improve access to domestic capital for alternate investments like VCs, venture capital, and the private equity industry. We have pension funds, we have mutual funds, we have insurance funds. All these can add to this kitty. We have to work towards changing our policies to make access to these funds easy for our entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much, sir, for helping us understand the importance of domestic capital formation and the steps that we could possibly take. So, when we talk about female participation labor force, it currently stands at about 20% when you look at the formal economy as a whole. IT sector has a bright side here, and from a survey conducted by PwC and NASSCOM, it was revealed that 51% of entry-level positions are filled by women. The average is around 34%, and this is because the participation falls as one keeps moving up the ladder. But Infosys has made a huge improvement as it showed an increase in number of women in leadership positions from about 4.8% in 2013 to about 15% in 2018. So what does the future look like, and how should other companies manage women participation in leadership positions and the labor force at large?
Let me tell you about the female population amongst the fresh engineering talent. At Infosys, when I left the company as the executive chairman in 2011, at that time, a full 35% of fresh engineers were women. We have to increase the percentage of women in our workforce in such a way that modern couples have the support system to take care of their children, their age-old parents, and domestic chores. This is the responsibility of both the husband and the wife. It's not the responsibility of just the women alone. Therefore, we have to create a support system that will help these modern couples. This requires us to improve training, salaries, housing, medical facilities, and children's education for domestic help, for those people who will help the modern couple as domestic help, so that they provide such support to modern young couples, and our modern young couple can add even more value to the country than they are doing today.
Absolutely, sir. I hope we have a quick process where all couples get that required support system to really improve the participation of females in the workforce. So, as we saw the diverse roles that you've played as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a visionary, as an investor, this is our last question, sir. If you were an artist, how would your portrait of India look like for the future?
I'm an old man. I'm running 75. Therefore, my portrait does not matter. Let me tell you what portrait you youngsters can create for India in the next 25, 30 years. I want you to remember that India has huge problems in population, water, clean air, land availability for housing and agriculture, nutrition and healthcare. Ever since the excesses of forced sterilization during the emergency, we have not put population control on the front burner. We are slowly becoming an unviable country, with India's per capita land availability becoming just 8% of the United States, 6% of Brazil, and 40% of China among the countries with large land masses. An article in the Technology Review from MIT has said that acute water shortage has already become India's problem. India has only 4% of world's fresh water, but has 16% of world's population. Last week's Times of India reported that 1.6 million people die every year due to various causes resulting from air pollution. India has the largest number of undernourished children in the world. 3 Indian cities rank among the 10 most polluted cities in the world. The only solution is to reduce our population growth rate. While southern and western India have been making decent progress in reducing population growth rates, the northern and the eastern part of India have not paid sufficient attention to this important issue that will wreak havoc on our country in the next 20 to 25 years. Therefore, my fervent plea to every one of the youngsters assembled here is to please emphasize the importance of reducing population growth rate in every gathering that you are a part of. That brings me to yet another important aspect of the portrait of India that I want you youngsters to create. President Franklin D. Roosevelt defined a true democracy as having four freedoms: freedom of expression, freedom of faith, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. A democracy works best in an environment of pluralism where every citizen has the freedom to practice one's own beliefs and faith without imposing it on others, have the freedom to express one's opinion responsibly, objectively, courteously, and fearlessly, and has the freedom to seek a better quality of life. Democracy in India will prosper only if we create a mindset that highlights the commonality of our beliefs rather than our differences. Since you asked me what I want India to be, I will say this. I want an India where the poorest child in the remotest corner of the country has access to decent education, healthcare, nutrition, shelter, and opportunity for bettering its own life and the life of its progenies. For this to happen, I want the youngsters assembled here to act according to the song that I am going to play now. This song is 60 years old and is from the 1961 Hindi movie Ganga Jamuna. My Sanskrit teacher in my pre-university class sang this song for us in 1962 when we asked his advice about how we should behave to make India a better place. Please listen and follow this advice. Let me now try and play that song if I can. Just a minute. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think that song sums up whatever we elders have to say to you. If you follow that song and act according to that song, I personally believe that you will make this country a great nation. You will create a portrait of India